Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the EUROPARC Federation webinar. I've seen that you have already congratulated all your colleagues from across Europe. We are very glad to have you here today. We are over 50 participants from all over Europe, from Greece, Finland, Croatia, Sweden, UK. Really glad that you could all join us today. My name is Barbara Paes. I am the Communications and Marketing Manager of the EUROPARC Federation, and I will be here today with you for 1 hour to discuss the management challenges of marine Natura 2000 sites. We have prepared a very interesting program for you, but before we start, let me hear some more about you. So please answer the poll, the questionnaire, that will appear on your screen now. We basically just want to know what is your involvement with protected areas or Natura 2000 sites. So if you can just answer, all would be great. Just to have an idea. Okay, so I see the majority work for national governmental organizations on nature conservation, or they work for marine protected areas or marine Natura 2000 sites. And 30% of the participants today, 35%, live nearby a marine protected area. Okay, great. So thank you very much for your answers. So we see that we are talking to professionals that are working in the field of nature conservation and especially working for marine protected areas. Very good. So let me first introduce you the EUROPARC Federation before we go ahead. We are the oldest and the biggest network of protected areas in Europe. We were created in 1973 to bring together professionals that were working on nature conservation across borders. We aim to have a sustainable nature valued by people, and for that we create tools and we bring together professionals to exchange their experiences and to learn each other. And within our network, we represent marine protected areas, but we also represent other national nature, regional nature parks, but also peri-urban parks and several Natura 2000 sites. And we are widely spread across Europe. So today I'm talking from the EUROPARC headquarters, but Fotius, one of our invited guests, is in our office in Brussels, and we have also another office in Barcelona, who actually is responsible for our work on the marine level. So my colleagues in Barcelona helped me setting up this webinar today. Apart from the 3 offices of the Federation, we are also spread with sections, regional and national sections from all over Europe. So we are trying to support parks protecting nature. How? By bringing people together. And that's exactly why we have created EUROPARC webinars, as this is a very useful tool for you to exchange experience and to learn with each other. So without taking further, can you listen to me? Yes, sound is fine. Okay, great. If you face any technical problem, just please write it down on the chat box. Great, thank you. So let me briefly introduce you the agenda. Today we will hear from Fotios Papoulias. He is working for the DG Environment, and he will give us an overview of the state of the EU marine environment and of the marine policy. Later, we will hear a case study from Tom Hooper from the Atlantic Marine area. And then we will go to the Mediterranean area with a presentation by Valentina Capanera from Portofino Marine Protected Area. Great. You can please use the chat box to address your questions to the presenters. please make sure that you write the name of the person to whom you are addressing your questions, because after the 3 presentations, we will have a debate, and I will be asking the questions that you have written on the chat box. I will be asking them to our guests today. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and I will ask Fotius to turn on his microphone. So Fotius is Policy Coordinator in the DG Environment, Nature Protection Unit, and he is in charge of implementing the Natura 2000 at sea. Fotius, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Barbara, for calling this webinar, and thanks to all participants. I'm really impressed by the number of interested people in this meeting. So, well, in this virtual meeting. So, as you heard, I work in DG Environment of the European Commission in the Nature Unit, in charge of the implementation of the European legislation for nature conservation. The Birds and the Habitats directives, and one of my tasks involves the contribution for the establishment of our Natura 2000 network and our legislation in general in marine areas. So I will give you an overview today of what we are, where we stand currently and what we're currently doing, trying to establish the Natura 2000 MPA network of marine protected areas. Starting first, I guess you're all familiar with the Natura 2000 network. It's based on our 2 directives, as I said, the Birds and the Habitats directives, involving on the one side the special protection areas for bird, for the protection of important habitats for birds, and on the other hand, it includes the special areas of conservation, which are designated to protect those habitat types and and the habitats of those species which are listed in the Habitats Directive, with the overall objective of our legislation being to maintain or achieve a favorable conservation status for those features. When it comes to marine, the Natura 2000 sites have to be designated for a number of habitat types which are entirely, let's say, marine. So we have 5 habitat types, entirely marine. We have also a number of marine species in Annex 2 of the Habitats Directive, for which Natura 2000 MPAs have to be designated, including certain marine mammals, sea turtles, a number of anadromous fish. And of course, sites have also been designated for a number of seabirds. About 60 seabirds are either entirely or partially using marine areas for their life cycle. Having said that, of course, there are a number of other marine habitat types which are, let's say, in the coastal or intertidal area. For example, we have estuaries or inlets and bays, which are, I would say, in the coastal areas, and are also addressed by marine policies. So, just in a nutshell, then, our work is trying to establish an adequate and well-managed network of protected areas for the protection of all those habitats and species. And of course, our action is also triggered and is based on the latest information about the status of our marine ecosystems. This slide here shows the information from the last reporting round according to our directives, which shows a picture more or less known, I guess, to most of you or to all of you, the fact that a very small proportion of our marine features is in good conservation status, and importantly, a big proportion of those, especially for marine species, the conservation status is still unknown, which points to the still significant knowledge gaps. And of course, you can see those here, this pie chart showing that this picture is, especially the unknown features are increasing the more we go from the coast to the open sea. These kind of general conclusions about the status of marine ecosystems is confirmed by other assessments done. For example, the European Red List of Marine Habitats that we financed about 2 years ago. And as a whole, when it comes to the key pressures which affect our marine ecosystems, clearly pollution, especially from land-based sources, and importantly, unsustainable fisheries are among the top 2 pressures affecting our marine ecosystems. Again, a report from the European Environment Agency then concludes on the basis of all these assessments that our European seas cannot be considered healthy, clean and undisturbed, and there is a need for action, and with particular reference to the European instruments which are suitable for that purpose. Our action is also guided by international commitments, the well-known Aichi Target 11 for the protection and conservation of at least 10% of our of seas through area-based conservation measures. We have the more recent Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 14, which has to do with marine ecosystems. And in Europe, of course, we have the European Biodiversity Strategy from 2011, which identifies among its key a key action to achieve our biodiversity targets, the completion of the establishment of the Natura 2000 network and its good management. As a whole, so Natura 2000 is a key pillar of our biodiversity strategy, and when it comes to marine, clearly it makes the biggest contribution in terms of marine protected areas in Europe. Clearly, MPAs are globally identified as an effective tool for conservation of marine ecosystems. And according to the latest information from a few months ago from this year, we are actually very happy and proud to say that Natura 2000, first of all, that in European seas, MPAs now cover more than 10% of marine areas under member state jurisdictions, and Natura 2000 makes really the biggest contribution for that target. Also, you can see here the significant increase of coverage of Natura MPAs in European seas over the last 5-6 years. Having said that, this slide shows a bit, gives some more details about the state of play with Marine Natura 2000, more than 3,100 marine sites. We cover, as I said, more than 9% of European seas, and if I'm not mistaken, according to taking into account some very recent designations from France, most probably Natura 2000 alone now exceeds the 10% of marine areas coverage. Clearly, maybe this, according to the CBD target, H11 target seems that we have achieved a target, but at the same time we are fully aware that the job is not done in terms of designations. The network there are still significant gaps, especially in the offshore areas, meaning in areas which are far from the coastal zone, usually within the exclusive economic zone declared by the different member states. So efforts are still ongoing there. But still we are, I think we should acknowledge this important contribution of our legislation towards this international target. In a nutshell, this slide shows the legal framework underpinning the management and the protection of Natura 2000 areas, because indeed we may be happy that we have achieved the RHE target in terms of designation of areas. However, the target, it's also about effective management of the areas, and clearly we're far from achieving this. So the legal underpinning of Natura 2000 from under the Habitats and the Birds directives provides some important tools in order to achieve effective management in terms of putting in place conservation measures corresponding to the conservation objectives of the areas, in terms of avoiding deterioration from and disturbance within the areas, and also in terms of providing a mechanism for the assessment of potentially damaging plants and projects. At the same time, we have a number of other important instruments at European level which can contribute to effective management, primarily in the area of fisheries, which, as I said, is the key pressure to marine ecosystems. The common fisheries policy, as it has been revised since 2013, provides some specific provisions and tools for establishing fishery measures for Natura 2000 areas in order to allow them to achieve the conservation objectives. But also it includes several other measures in terms of reducing the incidental bycatch of protected species in fishing gear, as well as improving the data which are collected and which concern the impact of fishing on protected areas and protected species. We have also the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which is I would say, an overarching framework for the protection of towards achieving healthy seas and achieving good environmental status of our seas. We have also the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, which importantly allows for the preparation and the implementation of maritime spatial plans towards achieving sustainability of the various activities at sea. So this just gives you an overview of the various instruments that are available at European level in order to continue to implement our specific goals under Natura 2000. Talking about fisheries, clearly we already are aware of pressures, and also thanks to the various projects and activities, including under the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, we're able here to, we can see already that there are some strategic approaches through risk assessments, which allow to make a kind of overlapping between, on the one hand, the mapped seabed habitats, on the other hand, the various sources of pressures, especially from bottom contacting fishing gear, and this then kind of sensitivity mapping, let's say, leads to an assessment of the areas where the impacts on protected habitats are the highest, and of course, these kind of technique, in order to these risk assessment techniques, then they point to the priorities for taking action when it comes especially to unsustainable fisheries. We're now in the phase, from our nature conservation legislation point of view, we're in a phase where we're trying to implement also an action plan that was adopted by the Commission in 2017 for improving the overall implementation of our legislation. This action plan followed the fitness check of our directives that some of you may be aware of. Includes a very big number of measures, more than 100, I think 115 specific measures. And some of those are particularly relevant to implementing our legislation in marine areas, starting with for example, with the completion of the Marine Natura 2000 network, so the completion of the designation of the areas, and importantly, the establishment of conservation measures for those areas. We put particular focus in this action plan also on the issues about fisheries. So we have developed some guidance on how to use the mechanism provided by the Common Fisheries Policy for establishing fishery measures for Natura 2000 sites, but also, and as a whole, to facilitate then the implementation of such measures. For example, we are boosting the biogeographical cooperation across marine biogeographical regions, towards exchanging good practices for management. And also we are trying to increase and to make full use of the financial resources which are available under European funds, especially under the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, for MPA purposes. As a whole, as I said, when it comes to completion of the Marine Natura 2000 network, what is of key importance is, on the one hand, to establish conservation objectives which will be smart, meaning specific, measurable, etc., and which will be based on the so-called favorable reference values for habitats and species. So, let's say, conservation objectives which will be science-based as far as possible, and then on that basis to put in place conservation measures through, for example, management plans for protected areas or other instruments, including full stakeholder involvement and, of course, good implementation on the ground, or rather at sea. I will give you an overview of our ongoing activities to support the whole effort of member states, and meaning all authorities, stakeholders, MPA managers who are involved in this process. We issued a few years ago some guidance on to facilitate the establishment of marine protected areas under Natura 2000. This has been complemented by other documents about setting conservation objectives and conservation measures. We have set up over the last more than 10 years, I would say, an expert group on marine issues focusing on Marine Natura 2000, which meets regularly, at least once a year. There is a number of documents and other which have been developed under this marine expert group, including, for example, methodology to assess the impact of fisheries on Marine Natura 2000 areas. This kind of sensitivity analysis matrices for fishing and non-fishing activities at sea. We're reviewing fishery measures which are being taken by member states, and we're exchanging good practice for that purpose. I mentioned the common fisheries policy and this basic regulation, which includes a specific provision for establishing fishery measures for Natura 2000 areas. It's this Article 11 of this basic regulation, and which is indeed an important step compared to previous versions of the common fisheries policy. And as you may remember, under our action plan, the Commission had committed to prepare some guidance on implementing this provision. So now we have this. Since last May, we have this so-called staff working document. It's a kind of guidance on how these provisions of the common fisheries policy can be used in an effective way in order to establish necessary fishery measures for protected areas, with particular emphasis on the so-called joint recommendations, which are required in those cases where within a protected area different member states have fishing activities and fishing vessels. I should also add that when it comes to our fishery, to our CFP regulations, there are also several other, let's say, daughter regulations under the basic regulation concerning data collection. There was a revision of the data collection framework, which now explicitly requires, for example, data for bycatch of protected species. We have also the multi-annual plans, which are adopted at regional level, which also provide an opportunity for introducing measures for protected areas. There is the final stage, new regulation for technical measures, which also explicitly allows for measures to protect marine ecosystems, etc. So this is just to say that there is, from the Commission, we're trying to provide a comprehensive set of instruments which should facilitate action for MPAs, in particular under Natura 2000. I mentioned the support to the establishment of Natura 2000, so just a few additional elements. I would like to, for example, to highlight the fact we're trying to demonstrate also the socio-economic benefits which arise from good management of MPAs, especially under Natura 2000. Socio-economic benefits in terms, of course, of more healthy fish stocks, but also in terms of contribution to climate change and other activities like recreation, which can provide also significant sources of income. We are also trying to increase, as I said earlier, the opportunities for financing MPAs under the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, but also other funds, and this is particularly important right now, ahead of the next programming period. Importantly, we are trying to allow for a mechanism. We have provided a mechanism to allow for exchange of good practices and knowledge at marine biogeographical level, and this happens also for terrestrial areas. And we're also applying this process for marine biogeographical regions. Very recently, about 3 weeks ago, we had the second marine seminar in Mallorca, which focused on those key issues about setting conservation objectives and favorable reference values and conservation measures for marine areas, but focused on specific species and habitats. So last but not least, I would like to mention the importance of providing sufficient financing for the necessary conservation measures and management measures for the protected areas. We are now ahead of the next programming period for the various European funds, and the Commission has already issued earlier this year its proposals for the new multi-annual financing framework for the period 2020 to 2027. And these proposals include also the new proposal for the regulation which will govern the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, which again includes specific provisions allowing for the financing of management, monitoring, awareness raising, etc., of Natura 2000 MPAs. It's important also to mention these proposals include an increased budget for the LIFE financial instrument, which has played, as probably you know, so far a pivotal role in supporting concrete conservation action also for our marine environment. In that regard, so ahead of this next programming period, it's very important that we have also the necessary, let's say, evidence about the needs, the financing needs for the protected areas, including our marine protected areas. So we're also in a phase now where the so-called prioritized action frameworks, the PAPs, are being updated by the member states, so that well, member states in reality, but also the Commission services will have the most up-to-date evidence about those needs, so then those needs in turn to be, as far as possible, reflected in the forthcoming operational programs. And we are right now in this phase of this updating, including also significant exchange of information, views at member state level, including through stakeholder consultations, for example, through workshops, which are also being supported by the Commission. So I would stop here. I think I have already spoken a lot. A lot of information is still available on our web pages. You can find these in the this information in the slides which have been distributed. I'm looking forward to the next presentations and, of course, to any kind of input and questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Fotios, for these, which give us a really good overview of the international and EU policy goals, but also of the financial and legal instruments to better treat our marine ecosystems. To all the participants, please don't forget to write down your questions on the chat box below. We will be discussing them on the debate. And following the line of thought that Fotios presented, it's indeed alarming the state of health of our marine ecosystems, and one of the major consequences of it is due to pollution and unsustainable fisheries. So if we think about unsustainable fisheries, I'm very glad that we have invited Tom Hooper from the Isles of Scilly to present his case. So Tom will tell us about the proactive management of fish streams within a special area of conservation in the Atlantic marine environment. And Tom is Chief Fisheries and Conservation Office for the Isles of Scilly Indoor. And he was formerly head of marine policy at the RSPB and led the work to design a network of marine protected areas in southwest England. So thank you very much, Tom, for having accepted our invitation, and we look forward to hear your practical example. Tom, you may turn on your audio. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to present this morning. The first map you can see is just for a geographical reference to see where the Isles of Scilly are located. You see that we are off the coast of Cornwall, a fairly isolated archipelago of 5 large islands and a permanent population of 2,000 people. And during the summer season, we have a huge growth in the numbers of visitors, with over 200,000, and increasing number of cruise ships. But of course, tourism is very important for the islands, providing 800 jobs and 35 million pounds worth of income. So many businesses operating wildlife trips to see the native seabirds and seals, and this is a huge driver. We know it's a huge driver for people coming. The fishing on the Isles of Scilly has been for centuries, hundreds of years, very low impact. It's primarily potting for crabs and lobsters, with one vessel using an otter trawl. So it's and always has been a very low impact fishery. Whereas, and what I will come to talk about later, the recreational disturbance is something which is increasing. So, as Barbara said, we are an authority of government, and this diagram, I wanted to explain the relationships between the different organisations involved. So this is us, we call the IFCA, Inshore Fisheries Conservation Authority, and they were set up in 2011 as part of a new Marine and Coastal Access Act in England, and replaced the Sea Fisheries Committees, which have been in place since 1888. And there is an IFCA, are something which exists around all of the coast of England. We are by far the smallest, consisting of 2 people, whereas in, for example, Cornwall, there is nearly 20 people and a very large budget. And we have responsibility for fisheries and conservation to 6 nautical miles. On my committee sits the Marine Management Organisation, which has national responsibility, Natural England, which is a government authority for nature conservation. There is the council and 4 fishermen. So overall, it represents a body of people who have responsibility for the management of the marine environment. The other thing is, of course, separately, the Marine Management Organisation has responsibility for marine planning and licensing and recreation nationally. And Natural England again has responsibility for conservation advice nationally. So they provide us with advice almost separately, I think, to the way that they would operate on the committee. So overall, we have responsibility to make sure that the fisheries is sustainable, and we do this through bylaws, for example, to limit the sizes of fish which are able to be caught, that we can limit the sizes of vessels which can come into our district. So, for example, we have a limit of 10 meters and 11 tons. So it means that vessels are always very, very small, which come into our district. And the district, of course, don't forget, is 6 nautical miles. And these 2 maps show here the Isles of Scilly, and this boundary here, which is 6 nautical miles, and all our responsibilities within this area. So this box represents the SAC, which was designated in 2005, and a little bit less easy to see are these small dots, which are the special protection areas, the SPA, for the large amount of breeding seabirds we have here, but specifically for 2 species. And these, of course, are the nesting sites. And what is happening at the moment are plans for an extension to the SPA to ensure that their feeding and foraging grounds are also protected. And this is something which is happening in other sites around England. a recognition there's no point in protecting breeding sites if you're not also protecting the areas where these seabirds feed. And the final part of this map shows the national designation, which are the marine conservation zones, which were these were designated in 2013 for additional features as part of the Marine and Coastal Access Act, to ensure that there was a fully representative network of protection in the network in England. And this means that we in fact have three designations, which creates its own complexity for management. And this is really what I wanted to talk about in brief in the next 2 or 3 minutes. There's a lot, I don't want you to necessarily absorb the detail here, but the point is there's a lot of different features which need management. And of course, if they need management, then they need to be monitored. And these are a very broad diversity of features, from the sort of shallow sand and weed habitat to the seagrass. We have 196 hectares of eelgrass, and then there's the deeper reefs and sponge habitats. So when you look at an overall map, a habitat map, what this shows is these large shaded areas are the deeper habitats of sand, the reefs which come in close, and then the red here showing the seagrass. And what this means is it's a very complicated mosaic of different features. And as Fotios said, we have a new approach in England since 2012, where we need to assess the impact of all the fishing and its potential damage to features within the SAC. Don't forget that's just within this box. So they asked to look at all of the different fishing types which we have here, and of course on the Isles of Scilly, because the majority is not towed or bottom contact fishing, there has been no additional management within the SAC. But we need to look at the scale and the frequency of all of this fishing and to do surveys and to understand in much more detail what the likely level of fishing activity is. And because it is already very light, there's been no management intervention. But we need to keep a very close eye on this fishing to make sure that it doesn't have an impact on the features within the SAC. Now, as I said, there's 3 future challenges I think that we have particularly here. One is around recreation, and you saw the picture earlier. I don't have an additional picture for this. Recreational disturbance is on the increase. There's growing numbers coming into Cornwall, people wanting to do walking, kayaking, windsurfing, etc. But we don't have the ability, we don't have the responsibility to manage recreation, and it's a difficult thing to communicate, because obviously we want people to come to our areas, but of course, as the numbers increase, so too does the potential for disturbance. And this is something which we will need to understand, that there is work now to map all recreational activities in all MPAs in England, and then I think there'll be need to do work to understand how this potentially has a disturbance on the features. The second challenge I think we have is around a government objective for what they call a whole site approach. As you will understand, and as Fotios explained, the Natura sites are around specific habitats and specific species, and it's around obviously ensuring the regulation of activities to ensure that those features are able to achieve a favourable conservation status. But we recognise, of course, that these don't exist in isolation. We need to consider how different human activities have impacts across larger sites. And this has, of course, a threat to the status quo, and a recognition that in a complex habitat and species that you can see here, where would management really be implemented, and how do you assess where management needs to be effective, and how whether you can introduce different zoning or whether you can ensure that the management of a small species, for example, one of these very, very small individual species, how do you really impact on that if there is fishing in other parts of the site? So this is a new government objective for a site-based approach rather than a feature-based approach, which I think has huge potential and recognises the fact that the marine environment is all very, very much linked. But it does have challenges for us in terms of implementation. The final point I want to make is around monitoring, and there is a statutory requirement for 6 yearly monitoring within the SAC, and that is the primary responsibility of Natural England. But the amount of, between 2008 and 2016, the amount of sea area in the UK has increased by 800%. There are now 297 protected areas and thousands of different features. And it's a huge, one would say almost impossible challenge to take place in all of those. And the primary requirement of any manager is to know how your MPA is doing. What is the long-term trend for those individual species? And we need to understand, using the existing technology, how each of those features is changing. So what we're doing is testing new technology. You see here in this photo, using video sledges and baited cameras, because ultimately our objective is to detect the long-term temporal trends and to understand how our management is affecting these specific features as well as the wider ecosystem, with these pressures coming from climate change, really from beyond the main fishing impact. My primary concern is really understanding the bigger global context, because ultimately the question that I ask myself as a manager is, we have the ability to put in place local regulations, but ultimately are these sufficient to counterbalance the pressures which are coming to these sites from many different places? So I will leave it. The main points I wanted to make is the relationships between the different organisations in managing sustainable fisheries, the responsibilities that we don't have, and how we need to make sure that we are more holistic in the way that we approach the management of a very small but isolated site, and of course to understand that we have a naturally low level of human pressure, which has allowed us to have extremely fast sites for wildlife, which we're obviously justly proud of. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. There are already some questions addressed to you, but we will keep. Ciao Valentina.
Hi.
Your audio.
Do you hear me?
Yes. But please turn off your audio so I can introduce you. Okay, thank you very much. So, having heard about the case in the Atlantic seas, we will go now to the Mediterranean, and we'll hear from Valentina Capanera what is the state of conservation in the marine protected area of Portofino. Valentina is project manager in the Portofino MPA since 2006, and she works mainly on the human impact inside the marine protected area. Her special focus is on professional fisheries and diving. And in the last year, she has been involved in several Life and Interact projects concerning the management of the MPA. So now, Valentina, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And to all our participants, keep writing your questions on the chat box, and we will be addressing them shortly. Thank you. Valentina, please turn on your audio.
Thank you very much for involving me in this webinar. Now I'm here to present the actual situation concerning management of Natura 2000 sites in Italy, especially linked to the role of Italian MPAs. I have to say that the Italian government recognized the Habitat Directive in 1997, and the European Commission started immediately a process of infraction concerning the delay in the action. The subjects in charge to the administrative and management function for the Habitat Directive are the regions. And here you have the number of Natura 2000 sites, both terrestrial and marine sites, in Italy, especially regarding the different regions of Italy. The number of sites is different in each region, but I have to say that the situation is different also for the way of proceed of each region concerning Natura 2000 sites. In order to explain something concerning the situation of each region, I asked the Italian MPAs to say something, to give me some information concerning their management of Natura 2000 sites, and most of them didn't answer me, but other give me some information. So here I reported the situation concerning Sicily region. Sicily identified site of community importance in 2016 and identified the sites corresponding with the location of the Sicilian MPAs. So I have information from Ustica, Egadi and Cyclopi MPA. I know that they have conservation measures for their Natura 2000 sites, but they don't have a management plan, and they don't have funds available for the management of the Natura 2000 sites. Concerning Sardinia region, I received information from Penisola del Sinis MPA and from Tavolara Punta Codacavallo MPA. For Sardinia, the situation is totally different because in Sardinia, the management of Natura 2000 site is really important. Sardinia identified site of community importance together with the boundaries of the local MPAs. And Sardinia worked on management plan in Natura 2000 sites, but they don't have conservation measures at the moment. And periodically, Sardinia regions give funds to MPAs in order to manage Natura 2000 sites, in order to create a management plan and also to update the management plan. For Apulia region, the situation is different again. Apulia region identified site of community importance in 2018, and we have two different situations also inside the region, because the Torre Guaceto MPA is in charge of the management of a site of community importance that has a management plan since 2010. But they say that they have difficulty to manage the side of the Natura 2000 site that is outside the limit of the MPA. While Isole Tremiti MPA is managed by the National Park of Gargano, and there is a special conservation zone inside, but the region hasn't still entrusted the management to the park. And at the moment, both of the Natura 2000 sites don't have a management plan, and they say that they don't have available funds specifically forecasted for the management of the marine sites. In Calabria, the situation is different. Regione Calabria approved the management plan for a site of community importance in 2008 and entrusted the management to the MPAs in 2018. I received information from Caporizzuto MPA. They say that we have 3 special conservation zones that are inside and also outside the MPA, and they have a management plan and also conservation measures, but the management plan is the same of the MPA. Calabria region identified specific funds to dedicate to the management of marine sites. In Lazio, Lazio region designed marine site of community importance in 1996 and approved conservation measure and management plan in 2014. In this case, management plan is the same of an MPA. This information was given me from Ventottene MPA, and that is in charge of the management of a special conservation zone. They say that they don't have funds to manage the Natura 2000 sites. Then there is Abruzzo region. Abruzzo identified site of community importance in 2005. And conservation measures were approved in 2017, where I have to say that the management plan is adopted when there is a management plan of an MPA. I received information from Torre del Cerrano MPA, and they say that Abruzzo region periodically give funds in order to manage these sites. Then last but not least, we have Regione Liguria. Regione Liguria identified 26 marine sites of community importance in 1997, but only including the presence of Posidonia oceanica Mido. Then in 2012 included also Coralligenous habitat in the site of community importance. In 2009, with a regional decree, entrusted local MPAs, entrusted the management of Natura 2000 sites to the local MPAs. And in 2014, approved conservation measures in collaboration with Ligurian MPAs. So we have JGMPA that is in charge of the management of site of community importance, while Portofino is in charge of a special conservation zone called Fondali Monte di Portofino. Actually, I have to say that we usually don't have money available to manage our Natura 2000 sites. We don't have money from Regione Liguria. Concerning specifically Portofino, I have to say that Portofino MPA is the third smallest MPA in Italy. It is placed in the northwestern side of Mediterranean Sea and was established in 1999. Despite of its small dimension, is an MPA really rich in marine biodiversity, flora and fauna, and with a strong human activity. So is an area not really easy to manage. Concerning the environment, on the east and west side of Portofino Promontory, we have Posidonia oceanica, while in the south of Promontory, we have coralligenous habitat. And since 2013, the staff of the MPA has a daily carry on a strong monitoring activity of these two habitats. In this map, I reported the limit of the MPA and also the limit of the special conservation zone. I have to say that the special conservation zone is larger than the MPA, and sometimes this could create some problems of management. In Portofino, concerning the management of Natura 2000 sites, we are working under a maritime program on a project called GIREPAM, in which we are trying to compare our activity on Natura 2000 sites with the activity carried on by Sardinia region, because in Liguria we have conservation measure, but we don't have management plan, while in Sardinia they have management plan, but they don't have conservation measure. So we are trying to bring the MPA and the Natura 2000 sites at the same level. Besides, in Portofino we have a live project called Relive of the species Patella ferruginea from Tavolara MPA in Sardinia to the Ligurian coast. So in order to comply with the indication given with the Habitat Directive, Portofino, together with other two Ligurian MPAs, Cinque Terre and Bergeggi, established a working table with Regione Liguria in order to integrate the list of species of the standard for the Natura 2000 sites with Patella ferruginea, for example. So Portofino, I can say that managed the Natura 2000 site also by the use of European funds. In this slide, I have a map provided by the European Commission in order to show you that the situation in Italy is not good. In 2015, European Commission started the infraction procedure concerning the lack of designation of special conservation zones, and it is clearly evident that France, Croatia, and also Malta work differently from Italy. But the Italian situation is not good, but I can say that the MPAs couldn't do more than they just do. And summarizing, I can say that where a Natura in Italy, where a Natura 2000 site is inside or partially included in an MPA, the MPA becomes the manager of the site, even if the region doesn't entrust the management of the sites, with, for example, with government funds or through European funds. Usually, if the Natura 2000 site is out of an MPA, the management doesn't exist, and if some conservation measures are, they aren't applied. Then there is a lack of homogeneity at Italian level, because some regions funded the creation of management plan before conservation measures. And in many cases, regions have the total power on management of Natura 2000 sites. So I can say that the process seems to be longer than the one foreseen, but it's difficult to compare Italy with other European countries because, for example, in France, some Natura 2000 sites have permanent employee, while in the Italian MPAs, the situation is totally different. Besides, in Italy, Natura 2000 sites are almost totally inside the MPA's limits, and the MPAs have a limited extension and often are not far from the coast, so it's difficult. They could have a real role in the ecological network as forecasted by the European Union. Thank you very much for your attention. And
yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valentina.
And thank you also. Wait. Okay, I need to turn off Valentina's audio. Thank you very much for your presentation, Valentina, and thank you also for giving us an overview of the state of marine protected areas in Italy. And I would like to ask you something, Valentina. Have you implemented already any measures with divers? The creation of divers?
With recreational divers, we usually, with some of them, we collaborate, especially in project. We have a project, for example, on climate change, and we are trying to engage recreational divers in order to collect daily information on the changing of the marine environment of the MPA, and we do the same also with professional fishery. I don't know if I answered you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will now ask some questions to Tom, although Tom has been answering them on the chat box. But anyway, Tom, could you let us know what's going to happen after Brexit with the Natura 2000 sites? Do you have any idea on that?
I'm just typing an answer to Eva, who asked the same question. You know, it's almost impossible to answer, and anyone following the news cycles in the UK at the moment would recognise that things are changing every day, and the reality is that we are thinking and we are preparing, and obviously we see risks, you know, and opportunities, and it's something which, of course, is a concern. From a marine context, of course, the network and thinking on a regional scale, on a big scale, is so important. You know, you cannot exist in isolation, and you know, this is what I feel and have felt very strongly. When of course the distance between MBAs in England and France is as little as 40 kilometers. And we need to make sure that we are thinking and planning regionally and sharing experiences as we are today. You know, of course, I see, and as Fotios talked about earlier, there are equally challenges within the Natura network, and I think you know, this is something that we would like to work with in collaboration. But I think the best answer to your question is just to wait and see, and from my perspective is to do the same. There's nothing much I can do on a very individual site level to either to prepare, because there is so much uncertainty.
Exactly. Thank you, Tom. You have answered the question to Team Vins on recreational activities, but are you already implementing some measure?
No, this is the challenge. Is, of course, for us is that when the IFCAs were set up, they had responsibility for commercial fishing, and the Marine Management Organization, the MMO, has responsibility for recreation activities and for licensing, but the MMO does not have a local presence, and they are a national organization, and it doesn't currently have the capacity to deal with this. And as I said to Tim, I think when you have a problem which is growing, particularly in the southwest, because it's more popular from a tourist perspective, I think traditionally, in at least in England, the recreation has not been something which is thought about in terms of management. Something which I do see, in many other global contexts where recreation is more carefully managed. So this is a new issue for us, and it has the potential to cause problems because traditionally recreation is seen as being a free activity. When you start to regulate or manage something, it has an emotional context. Who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do? So we'll have to approach this very carefully. And I think it's what I wanted to do in my presentation is highlight that we don't have this capacity, but we are aware of the issue, and work is ongoing to understand how much of an issue it is, and that's the primary problem, is that we don't yet know. As people increase and they're doing co-steering, it's an activity where you kind of climb up a cliff and jump off a cliff, which has an impact, and jet skis and things like this, or even kayaks, which are traditionally not seen as big disturbance, but because they are quiet, something I do myself, it does have an impact, and we don't know how yet to manage it.
Okay, yes, that's a big challenge all over Europe, I fear. So thank you, Tom, for your answers. Meanwhile, if you want to ask something else to Tom, please write it on the chat box. And I will ask now Fotius to answer some questions that our participants addressed. Fotius, is there any estimate of how many Marine Natura 2000 sites are being managed, monitored, or integrated in management plans in Europe after its designation?
Hello again. No, the answer is no. We don't really have this kind of estimate for several reasons. First of all, the establishment of Natura 2000 at sea is still ongoing. And we have also to bear in mind the legal obligations. We need to bear in mind also the legal obligations under the Habitats Directive, which means that member states have a number of years, up to 6 years, to designate the areas as special areas of conservation and establish the necessary conservation measures. So it's an ongoing process, and it's very difficult to give figures how many are being managed, or even more difficult to say how many are being managed well. However, we have some anecdotal, I would say, information from certain regions or through regional networks. For example, for the Mediterranean region, there are some surveys carried out by RACSPA under the Barcelona Convention and with the help of MEDPAN, and it seems that less than 50% of Mediterranean Natura 2000 sites have management plans in place. So I would say that this picture may be different in other marine regions according to the, let's say, maturity of the MPAs at least under Natura 2000. But again, it's difficult to give an overall figure for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Fotius. You mentioned that the establishment of Natura 2000 sites is still ongoing, and there is a question, actually several questions from Theodore, but I will only address you one of his questions. When you're establishing a new Natura 2000 site, how are historical views taken into account?
Again, according to the Birds and the Habitats directives, the establishment, meaning the designation of an area, has to be done entirely on the basis of its ecological value and interest, on the basis of the criteria set out in the directive. Practically this means it has to do with the presence, the distribution of marine habitat types, the concentration of marine species, how they are using particular marine areas for various parts of their biological life cycle, etc. When it comes to the management of the areas, of course, any kind of historical rights, I mean, it's all very clear what historical right could involve. It could involve, for example, fishing rights. It could involve also existing uses of the coastal or the marine part of an MPA. Then, of course, the management has to take into account all these, let's say, socio-economic needs and considerations. But still within the overall objective that the management of the area has to be set up, and the conservation action has to be taken so that the contribution to the overall objective of good conservation status is achieved. A particular example is, of course, fishing activities, fishing rights, established fishing rights. We have many areas. I mean, I'm aware of many areas, for example, in the North Sea, where there are long-standing fishing rights for different member states. And as a matter of fact, this is why I mentioned this now provision in the Common Fisheries Policy, which allows for a process, for a mechanism to come up with the so-called joint recommendations from the different countries which have fishing interests and activities in an area towards the necessary fishery management regulation of fisheries in that particular area.
Thank you, Fotius. One final question from Federico Minozzi. If the main pressures identified are from pollution and fishing, considering also the limited number of marine protected areas or Natura 2000 marine sites, but also the limited resources and surface protected, what are the priorities that you see for marine protected areas? And would you recommend or suggest any local level, but also international work for organizations like EUROPARC?
Well, priorities, of course, priorities are up to the MPA managers and their respective management bodies to set for the areas. But as a whole, and let's say from our perspective that we're trying to implement Natura 2000 MPAs I would say an important thing is that the MPA managers, they are aware of the overall European priorities. Where do we stand currently in terms of, I mean, there's a debate about setting conservation objectives and conservation measures. I mentioned this biogeographical process, which is ongoing. So one important thing, I think, for MPA managers is to be aware of what are the European priorities, and then what are also the available means in order to allow them as MPA managers to achieve their objectives and to fulfill their own tasks. For example, financial instruments, being aware of the opportunities provided by the European Maritime and Fishery Fund, or being aware of opportunities under LIFE We heard already from Valentina how they have used the LIFE instrument. So being aware of all those priorities and the opportunities also is, I think, we can identify this as a kind of priority or a kind of recommendation maybe for the MPA managers. And in that regard, the participation in all possible fora for information exchange, good practices, knowledge, experiences, expertise, etc., I think is very important. And here is exactly where I see really a big role for EUROPARC. Already today's webinar is a practical, is a concrete response to that need. So I think that EUROPARC, through its network, it can convey in a way the more higher level European priorities to a more local level, but at the same time, as it's happening actually today through the experiences we heard from Tom and from Valentina, EUROPARC can also convey the needs and the views from the local level to a higher level. There is a well-established dialogue actually between EUROPARC and the Commission. Furthermore, there are many other networks which are very active. In the Mediterranean, there is MET, which is, for example, very active, and it includes within its network many MPAs. So this also provides, this kind of networks also provide a mechanism for exchange of information among the MPA managers, so that we can all together somehow improve and increase our understanding and our knowledge.
Thank you very much, Fotios. So indeed, we will keep on sharing expertise on the marine Natura 2000 management, but also trying to provide new tools for protected areas to implement the EU goals. Meanwhile, there are some questions from Theodore, but we are running out of time. I will put you directly in contact with Fotios, and Fotios can answer you directly, Theodore. For all participants, thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much, Valentina, Fotios, and Tom, for having joined us today. It was really interesting what you have shared with us. By tomorrow, all the participants will receive the recording of this webinar, but also the presentations and some links to the reports that Fotios mentioned during this presentation. And meanwhile, we look forward to hearing your own management challenges. So do write us, share with us, what are you doing in your area, so we can exchange your experience with other colleagues from across Europe. Indeed, the marine ecosystems are threatened and they need better action. And we are here to connect you with your colleagues from across Europe. This is our last webinar of 2018. But next week, on Monday, EUROPARC Atlantic Isles, our section in the UK, they are organizing another webinar, this time looking at the peatland code. This is on Monday, the 10th of December, and everyone is able to participate. You can look in our website, europarc.org/EUROPARC-webinars. Thank you very much for having joined us today, and we hope to see you again next year. Thank you very much, Fotios, Tom, and Valentina once more, and have a nice day. Thank you.